If you've seen my previous video on the G305, you will know that I made that mouse look really ugly, and I got a lot of comments about that. But I also got a lot of joking comments about reducing the weight and how silly that thing is, which I disagree with. I reduced the weight even further, and now it feels even better to play with the mouse. I also changed how I make one of the sides more flat. I didn't decide whether I want to do it to the thumb side or I will just leave this side more flattened. But the method with which I redid the flattening is, well, I basically threw away the tennis grips. If you haven't watched my previous video, I'll post a link in the description, you should probably watch it. For newcomers, I'll just mention all the things I did to this mouse. First off, the biggest thing that you can do to improve this mouse is pretty widely known. You have to replace the battery, the basic alkaline AA battery, with a lithium AAA battery. And this isn't how your battery compartment will look by default. This is already one of the changes that I made compared to my last video. If you take apart this mouse, then you will have the option to take out the battery compartment. It's held in place by 3 screws and it weighs 5 grams. So if you take it out, your mouse will be lighter with 5 grams. However, you will lose the DPI button if you don't cut out the DPI button from that whole assembly, because the DPI button is actually part of the battery compartment. If you do cut it out, however, you can place a little bit of white tack on the micro switch, which this button presses, and gently push the button into the gooey mess that you've made right there with the white tack or blue tack or whatever color tack you prefer. That will keep it in place, and that will make it so that you will still be able to press and use the DPI button with it being cut out from the whole battery compartment thingy. So if you did that, you'll need to attach the wires which get electricity from the battery just with some kind of tape or something. You can also solder them onto a battery, but that's not really that practical, because when your battery runs out you'll have to rip apart the solder. So I've just strapped them on really tightly with some sellotape. And that was it for the weight reduction part. I've changed out the battery to a smaller one, but still relatively the same capacity, because lithium batteries will last longer than alkaline ones. I don't know the exact milliamp number on it. You can research the internet, but for some reason, even big brands like Energizer with this lithium battery, they're secretive about their milliamp hour claims on their batteries for some odd reason. Moving on from the weight reduction part, I'll just cover what I did with the sides. That's like the least important thing on this mouse that I've done. It still improves it a bit, but it's not as important as the last thing I'm gonna say. So what I've done to the side of the mouse is applied some molding putty on it. I did it with wet hands, with just my fingers, and tried shaping it in a way which would fill out the gap, so the side would resemble the G100S. The bulge on the side is just too much, and I'm not the only one who thinks this. So I tried to fill out the sides to make it more flat, more G100S-like. I did this a couple of months ago, and the molding putty is still totally intact. It's in its place. The molding putty that I recommend is this one if you want to try this mod. You can get different like hardnesses of it and colors, it doesn't really matter. I just had a really nice experience with this brand. And if you're really bothered by the sides being bulgy, you can do it on both sides. But the most important thing is to sand the mouse. You could make it glossy with a couple of 1000 grit sandpapers and just a lot of work. I made it just slightly glossy, but it's a far cry from how the mouse felt by default. You can see that it's a little bit shiny right now. That's not because of oil from my hands or residue or anything like that. It's just that I've sanded the mouse with a couple hundred grit sandpaper. I think it was 600 or 800. The higher you go in grit, the more shinier a mouse will get. So the default texture on the G305, in my opinion, is really not great. It's kind of a hard texture, which gets really slippery if even a little bit of moisture escapes from your fingers, which it will, most likely. And even if your hands are dry, this one just feels more grippy, and whenever you start sweating while gaming, because you're watching a video about a gaming mouse and modding it, you try hard, that's your nature. So whenever that happens, this mouse will stay a lot more grippy than it did when it was in stock form, so I really recommend sanding the surface of it. And the last thing I did to this mouse is, as you can see, it has white PTFE feet. These are tiger arcs from AliExpress. I'll put a link to these as well in the description. So yeah, that's it. If you want to see my video about this mouse, which is a 3D printed S2/FK2 shaped mouse with like carbon fiber insert on the bottom to make it more rigid, which uses G305 internals and is 60 grams, then stick around. You can order this shell from AliExpress for like $40, $45, and not to spoil anything from my future video, but it's pretty great.